So I just found out actually that we at the NIC are the very first people in Pakistan that Courtney and her team are meeting. So I feel doubly honored that we're able to host her at this event. So thank you again for that.
Thank you.
So what are some of the KPIs that you guys look at when you invest in startups? And what are some of the changes that you see in emerging markets that need to be made in order for people to get investment from Fundamental?
So I think I'll probably break that up into two different answers. Investing at pre-seed or seed stage, the business model is going to be iterated on again and again and again. Prior to 500, I was a founder myself. In fact, 500 invested in my company back in 2012. So I know the game of iteration coming through and really having to find that product market fit. So we want to back founders who are committed to that journey, who have a strong team and are able to withstand certainly the challenges that come with being a founder. So you're really looking for that hunger and certainly product or market expertise is helpful. It's not always necessary. You see founders who come in and just have a completely new vision for how the world should work, and that's really exciting too. And other things we look for at the earliest stage, the ability to dedicate time to the startup. So a lot of times we'll hear pitches and folks are wanting to kind of do both, be an employee and a founder at the same time. We usually back teams that are fully into the startup. There's also just something special, right? That you want to see in that founder mentality. And one of my favorite parts of my job and getting to travel all around the world is you really recognize that the I don't know what you call it, motivation that's within founders, the way that entrepreneurs think, it's the same everywhere. It's that same desire to really create something and see, something built that's going to contribute back to the community that they're in. And the second question I forgot.
So what can startups do to become more attractive to global investors?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We've invested in both nascent markets, emerging markets, and advanced markets. And one of the things that I've tended to notice over time, and certainly 500's history has seen, is that the earlier the market, a lot of times you'll see founders who are pretty focused on just building a business within their own community. One of the things that we're starting to really look for more and more is the early desire to want to go global, right? To want to really hit a home run. And I think that's super important. So we really like founders who have this global mentality right from the beginning, because you have to be able to, of course, operate outside your own market. So that's something that's we've been focusing a lot on lately. I think there's so much to fundraising. I mean, not just with 500, but just generally in being a founder in fundraising. And some of the tips that we like to share with people. Keep your investors or your potential investors up to date. Let them know what you're doing. Send them an update, once a month. Even if they say no, just keep hitting them with updates and do what you say you're going to do. And so that is very helpful for us to see that founders are continuing to iterate and continuing to make progress. So that's one way that you can certainly stand out.
Awesome. So let's talk about Pakistan right now. Why are you here?
Well, I'm here because there's so many fantastic founders in Pakistan. I mean, that's really the bottom line. We've been fortunate to back many Pakistani founders through our global accelerator that's based in San Francisco and directly in the funds that we're deploying. And we've seen certainly an increase in the number of Pakistani founders applying to our programs, reaching out for investment. We've seen the quality increase over the last few years as well. And for us, as investors who really tend to focus on emerging markets, it's the right time to be here. I truly believe that Pakistan has hit the inflection point from the founder community, and is only up from here. So, of course, as a venture capital firm, we are very financially motivated, but certainly 500 also has an ethos of really believing that our contribution to society is investing in founders who are going to create jobs and are going to create advancement.
Especially for early startups, valuations are challenging. What are some of the methodologies that you guys look at when it comes to having a startup, looking at them for investment?
Yeah. So it changes quite a bit based on the stage that we're investing in. And for our global accelerator, just to give you an example, I believe the companies that come through our San Francisco accelerator are automatically set in a $2.5 million valuation. Now that number has kind of raised over time. I don't actually recall what it was when they invested in my company a decade ago, but I know it wasn't $2.5 million. And that changes for us by market. So we have an accelerator in the Middle East. I believe the valuation is closer to $1 million, for example, at the seed stage. So the things that we're looking at, I mean, certainly traction matters. I would say that the traction that you're seeing at the early stages of your startup is certainly going to determine big part valuation. But really what we see is the team. The team really tends to drive valuation in our experience. So if you have returning founders who already had a lot of success or successful exits, they're going to command a much higher valuation because the risk has been somewhat mitigated from the investor's perspective. We've been fortunate to back a couple of recent companies through here, through Pakistan, being Telltale and Hawaii. And those were intense rounds, hot rounds, that we were able to invest in. I can't disclose their actual valuations, but we were really happy to be able to back those founders and continue to see them do well.
Both those companies are friends of NIC. They're here whenever we ask them to come in and share their insights and knowledge. So that's awesome to see. The other thing we noticed recently among the more senior founders, Ahsan, by senior, I'm not talking about age, I'm talking about people who've been in the ecosystem for 4, 5, 7 years. They're so willing to give back. They're so willing to give time, energy, share their insights. There's not a lot of competition per se between startup founders, which is I think encouraging. Is that something that you see in other markets? What kind of differences or similarities are you seeing in Pakistan versus other, let's say, developing markets?
One of our partners out of our Southeast Asia fund, Kylie, he often described or kind of compares Pakistan to Indonesia. Indonesia back in 2013, 2014, but actually even accelerating even faster than what we saw in Indonesia, which are all great signs. To your question about the willingness of the ecosystem to give back, one of the things that we do is assess ecosystems and characterize whether an ecosystem is nascent, emerging, or advanced. And one of the qualities and the real the telltale signs of a healthy ecosystem is that willingness for the founder community to want to come and give back, either because they've had successful exits and they're coming back and reinvesting, or maybe they haven't had successful exits and they're coming back to share the war stories with other founders. So certainly one of the things that surprised me about moving to the Valley when I moved to the Valley from Texas back in 2012 was the willingness for the community to be open. And I think founders, one of the great things about being a founder is when you meet other founders, you feel connected because you know the pain that they're going through. And so being able to talk to other founders is such an important part of what we're doing and certainly something that we would encourage.
So you touched on founders that have been successful. Can you give some advice to founders that may be struggling today, that may be struggling to raise capital, that may be struggling to scale for whatever reason, because you've been a founder and now you're on the other side of the table. So what advice do you have for them?
how much time do you have? Because I could definitely go on and on about this topic. Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different things. I'll speak specifically about fundraising because that tends to be where we get a lot of questions. And fundraising is just such a unique beast, right? Asking somebody to give you money is just hard. And one of the things that we tend to see is there's just such a big knowledge gap. When you're raising money for the first time, it's so difficult to know where the VCs that are sitting in front of you are coming from, where they are in their funds, what their own mandate is, etc. So I think it's definitely important to do your research and make sure that the VCs that you're talking to or the angels that you're talking to are even relevant, for the stage of your company and for the sector, etc. And generally, I think the things that I see founders miss when fundraising is the fact that they try and they go into way too much detail. Most investors, certainly they need to understand the story. They need to be able to drop the story of what you're working on. So being able to really simplify your business and your model into a story that's understandable and digestible is just huge. You want them to kind of have that aha moment. Oh yeah, I get it in the first 15 or 20 seconds, and then you can go in with the details. So that's one thing I really like to impress upon founders is making sure that you don't lose sight of the narrative. Because people at the early stage, at the seed stage, they invest based on emotion. It's really hard to understand that as a founder, but they want to resonate with something that you said, especially angels. So you could go on and on about raising for angels, but I think it's really important not to lose the narrative. Other things that we see founders struggle with, I think it's really easy in the early days to not spend enough time with your customer. That's the number one thing. And if you're a first-time CEO, it's hard enough being a CEO, recruiting people, hiring people, firing people, etc. But you really have to spend the time talking to your customers, iterating on the product, and just trying to find that product market fit. Until you have that engine that's working, nothing else matters. And it's easy to get distracted.
Yeah, there's always a shiny new thing to chase after and so on, right?
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the advisory work that you do with governments and regulators around the world. We have an opportunity here at this point in time to actually help our regulators create frameworks that are conducive to the growth of startups. What are some of the policy measures or changes that you think would be helpful for a developing market like Pakistan to encourage A, the growth of startups, and B, the investments in startups?
Yeah, so with 500, we look at kind of 6 different elements of an ecosystem. So we're thinking about things like the actual startup performance, so what you're seeing from a startup new creation perspective, what you're seeing from a talent perspective, what you're seeing from the ability for these startups to access other markets even outside of their own. We're thinking about the government regulation, we're thinking about the investment landscape, and we're thinking about the general support platform. So those are the kind of 6 areas that we break down an ecosystem and assess in an ecosystem wide. Early in the ecosystem's life cycle, one thing that's really important is that the government ease regulation as much as possible when it comes to startups. So that can be in getting licensed, if licensing are required, making sure that there's transparency and speed in getting startups the licenses they need. Certainly, if there's any sort of there needs to be the ability to recruit not only from within your own country, but bring talent from abroad as well. And so the ability for foreigners to be able to come easily with visas, get startup visas, go back and forth to other countries is also super critical. If you think about Silicon Valley worked because there were amazing immigrant founders coming from all over the world. And this is something that I see a lot of governments struggle with understanding. So we are always advocating for really the ability for founders and other startup talent to move back and forth. I I think the other thing that we really like to see from a policy perspective, especially from the banking perspective, is really healthy sandboxes, regulatory frameworks to be able to get the licensing needed for fintechs and insurance and other startups. So we certainly try to advocate from that perspective. And then education, right? I think certainly it's critical to have a strong, technical talent pool, but it's not. So right now, the fund that has been investing primarily for us in Pakistan is what we refer to as our global fund. So we have a number of different funds that are focused on a specific geography, but our global fund is really looking to back the best of the best companies out of a number of geographies. So what we tell Pakistani founders today who are interested in raising money from 500 is to, on our website, you can go and you can apply to that global accelerator, which is mostly looking for seed stage companies that have some revenue, some traction, etc. But one of the things that I'm here doing is certainly exploring what a more dedicated Pakistan strategy will be for 500. So part of the trip that I'm so thankful to be here on is just learning from all of you on how 500 can contribute even more to the ecosystem.
So it's a global, 500 global is one.
Yes.
Hi, Courtney. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. My question is, actually, I'm divided into 2 parts. First one is that if we are a startup, which is in a sector which is already, it's gained a lot of, founders have already raised a lot of money in this. So it's like, quite competitive. Do you still think there's a point in, trying to get more money? Or would you think that already so much money has come into this sector, which is e-commerce, So, what's your advice on that? And my second part is, I was in contact with a senior rep at your company, a senior leader at 500, and he said we're over-indexed for Pakistan at the moment. So is that the case, or are you actually planning to, expand your funds for Pakistan?
There's a long way to go in e-commerce, so I would certainly, I don't think there's still so many innovations. I think also just market penetration within Pakistan for e-commerce that needs to happen. That I would look at that and say, it's overcrowded, don't touch it. If that's what you were asking. With regard to being over-indexed in Pakistan, I don't know who you spoke with, but I'm here certainly exploring even more indexing in Pakistan. So no, I don't think we're over-indexed in Pakistan.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for making the trip. One thing that I feel like most founders in Pakistan don't realize is how to answer the question whether venture financing is right for them, and obviously whether they are right for venture financing. And I think that's largely down to the fact that certain markets in Pakistan are too small for venture financing to ever make the return that it's looking for. Now, what's 500's thesis around Pakistan and other emerging markets in sectors or certain markets that would be suitable for venture financing?
Generally speaking, 500 is backing software businesses that are capable of producing exponential returns. That's probably the easiest way to say it. We are sector agnostic, meaning we invest across the board. I think some of the sectors that we're excited about within Pakistan right now, certainly fintech. I think there's still a ton of upside from the fintech perspective here in Pakistan. E-commerce is really interesting. Infrastructure, I think, hasn't even gotten started. I think that will be really interesting from from an investment perspective. Obviously, we've got Kolachi, which is focused on health tech. We expect health tech in emerging markets to really be critical, especially over the next couple of decades. So I think it's still such an early market that there's going to be room for all sorts of industries. Typically, as things start to mature, you'll see more of a consumer and BPA focus as well. I think it's going to be some time before we see a stronger B2B market here, but that's certainly something that we're looking forward to.
perspective, what are some of the mistakes that founders make when they're scaling, especially scaling really rapidly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's really difficult for first-time founders scaling is just the human element of running a team that you might have been comfortable running a team with 5 people, but running a team with 500 people is a completely different experience. So not getting infrastructure or ops support early, whether that's HR or just marketing. There's so many things you have to be building at once. So you'll see founders sometimes hold the reins a little bit too tight, and they need to give away their Legos, right? There needs to be other people who are out there building various components of your business. So not empowering people quickly enough, I think is something that we've seen. And then, you always have to watch the cash. Always have to watch the cash and make sure that the engine that got you to the point that you were scaling is continuing to be built and keeping pace with the rest of the market, because everybody's out there innovating very quickly. So it's really good.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks for coming to Pakistan. So I think one of the biggest problems I found from an ecosystem perspective is there's a lot of great ideas and a lot of super raw talent, but what you were saying earlier about you want founders to be dedicated and not be doing 2 jobs at once. In Pakistan, the economic conditions are such that it's really hard for people to quit their job and dedicate full time to even get their idea to a seed stage level where they could get funding. And so I guess looking at models in Indonesia and India, how can we use examples of there to really accelerate and help founders?
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity for public-private partnerships early in an ecosystem. So the ability at the pre-seed or even MVP level for governments to be able to come in and provide subsidies for founders, grants for founders, for programs like this and others is super critical. You have to have that just to really get the new startup creation pipeline going. I think the other thing that we like to see is certainly coming in investors who are focusing on pre-seed. I think this wasn't as popular. Now it's starting to kind of pick up steam. We'll see pre-seed actually dedicated funds. We hope to see a lot more of that here. I mean, certainly that's something that we're thinking about even as we kind of materialize our own dedicated Pakistan strategy. But in the early days, it's really important to have really strong government support in those public-private partnerships to be able to encourage as much new startup creation as possible.
Sorry, here. Okay.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to host you in Pakistan, and I'm actually very encouraged to learn that you have emerging market focus. The reason being that a lot of startups are told you that you can't just limit yourself to market. You have to see yourself from a global perspective. But then the problem is, are we at an inflection point that a Pakistani startup can actually tackle regional and a global market effectively? And a corollary to that question is, a lot of investors obviously look at de-risking, which is understandable. But sometimes it feels like the level of de-risking we have to go through, one as a Pakistan startup, emerging market focus, comes to the point where it sometimes just genuinely feels unfair compared to other markets. Do you feel that's the case, or is that a wrong conception?
Yeah, I do think that there's certainly a natural evolution into markets, and right now it's still early days. I think it is an inflection point for Pakistan, but it's still early days. And what you'll see is many of the founders who are building during those early days, there is certainly an element of sweat equity that gets put into building the ecosystem that the later founders will benefit from. So I think it's very real to say that founders in emerging markets have it harder than founders, certainly in more advanced markets. But time will catch up, and Pakistan will evolve very quickly. I think even much more quickly than what people expect. But in the meantime, that doesn't make it any easier for the founders who are operating today. And so, I do think it's important to have a global perspective as a founder really early on, but there's many milestones that have to be, with those two companies in particular, and then maybe more broadly, there's certainly an element of maybe grit for the founders. I really don't know how else to say it. It's just like an unwillingness to give up. And I think that's really important in the early days, even in companies that are, having a successful journey so far like that. There's still struggles, right, that they're going to face. And I think seeing the founders' willingness just to go after it no matter what is really important. Things that cause us to say no, the team is just so critical in the early stage. And when there's team dynamic issues, that's not a great thing. That's usually would be a pass. When there's cap table issues, so it's unfortunate, but we see founders who have raised a small amount of money and given away a significant amount of capital to angel investors or others that perhaps aren't as sophisticated, and if the cap table shot from the beginning, it's really tough for us to come in and invest. Other things, certainly, the diligence is important. Even at the early stages, we're still doing some level of diligence, so any sort of restructuring issues we have to clean up, that's important. And then, like I said, founders whose attention is very divided elsewhere, and that makes it difficult for us to invest, at least at the seed stage.
One final follow-up question. Do you guys have any issues with investing in outside domicile startups, or do you guys expect them to be registered abroad? Because that's it's a common concern that advisors tend to bring up, that one should domicile their startup abroad purely because of the capital repatriation concerns, things like that.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough question. Typically, what we will do is eventually we will ask the companies to convert. We give a list of 5 different domiciles that we're willing, I believe it's 5 that we're willing to kind of invest in. But it changes. There's examples where in other markets the frameworks have come online and it makes it viable for us to invest, in a domicile that maybe we didn't in the past. So we're always open to reviewing that, but generally speaking, because we want the founder to be able to raise downstream capital, we want to put them in as vanilla a structure as possible. So we tend to encourage that.
Thank you.
I'd love you to tell what those 5 are.
Oh, good. I few that are thinking of. I know ADGM is one. Obviously, Delaware is one that we're looking at. Somewhere in the UK or Netherlands, we're typically supporting, and I'll need to think about the other 2.
What's the capable?
For startups, I don't know if we do things or our funds we look at, but Singapore. Yes, Singapore. Yeah.
Thank you, Courtney. That was awesome. We're going to be serving tea and snacks in a minute, so you'll get to talk to Courtney just now. I just want to say thank you for taking the time. And you might have noticed the comments right on all the questions. The first thing they said was thank you for coming to Pakistan. And I think it's a huge thing for us because we're not used to being on the global stage, right? We're not used to people like Courtney making their way to Pakistan. And, we hope that you're the first of many. But it's awesome that you're here. I do want to give a big shout out to Aly Fahd from Pak Launch for helping us to coordinate this event. You did a really good job. Thank you, Aly. I think you were murdered and if I've forgotten to mention him. But thank you, Aly and Mehdi. We really appreciate it. It's great to see you here, and I know there's big things that are happening for Pakistan in the future, and we're so glad that you want to be a part of it. So, welcome to Pakistan once again, and thank you again for your time. Let's go have some tea.